big lashes on today. Hello, this is What's with People with Doc Locke. I'm social psychologist Dr. Stephanie Lockbuehler, and today we will be talking about the question, what's with people talking about research? What's the difference between actual scientific research and just doing a Google search or reading articles online? And how can you tell if those articles or studies that are claiming to be research are really science or just bullshit? I thought these videos were about social psychology. Like, why are you talking about science? Well, because that's what social psychology is. It's the scientific study of the way that people think about, influence, and relate to others. The key word in that is scientific. A lot of people think that they can understand or can explain why people think and do the things that they do just from what they observe or experience every day. But if that were all it took to understand why people do people things, then everyone would be a social psychology researcher, and what the fuck did I spend 10 years in school for? God! But look, it's not that simple to just trust our instincts when it comes to understanding why people. Here are some examples why. It's been considered common knowledge that birds of a feather flock together, but it's also been said very famously by the world-renowned MC Scat Cat and that lady singer that opposites attract. So, common knowledge can obviously be contradictory, which means that we need a better way to figure out which one is accurate, because common sense ain't doing it. Or think about a young person who says, I don't know anyone who's died from COVID-19. All my friends that got it just say it was like the flu, so it's not that dangerous. This type of evidence is also called anecdotal evidence because it's based on personal observation and not actual science. It's very limited and based on few people out of millions, so it can be misleading because it's not representative of the entire population. Or another example would be when an online article comes out, and let's say that it says that a study found that as ice cream sales increased, so did crime and murder rates. Next thing you know, people start saying that ice cream causes violence. This is an example of people just taking things at face value and not really thinking about them critically. There could be other variables at play. For instance, it could actually be that summer months see crime rates increase for various reasons. It just so happens that that's also when ice cream sales are higher. This is why all scientists, which includes social psychologists, rely on the scientific method. Yeah, you know that thing that you learned in every biology or physics or chemistry or psychology or really any science class that you've ever taken since first grade that you didn't pay attention to then and you're probably shutting down now. The scientific method is pretty fucking cool though, because it's all about answering questions about the things that we observe in our world. It's a systematic way to test our educated guesses on why things are the way that they are, why people do the things that they do, with the goal of either supporting or contradicting those guesses or previous findings. Yo, that scientific method is pretty fucking cool, y'all. And since I am always looking for a reason to dress up, how about we make this review of the scientific method fun? Let's make some science and let's make it real! Thank you, Dr. Lockbuehler. That last name sounds German. Behind step number 1 is observation. I'm coming up with a question based on that observation. Maybe I noticed that smokers on campus are all hanging out in a designated smoking area, but they seem to be having a good time together. And I wonder if, even though the goal of designated smoking areas is to discourage smoking by making it inconvenient to smoke anywhere they want, maybe the social aspect of it makes it more enjoyable and people will then visit the areas more often and maybe smoke more.
Behind step number 2, then I look up what's already been done on this topic or related scientific studies that may help me answer my question. So I searched through academic journals, and I do find that one study shows that rats preferred hanging out with other rats while getting nicotine above and beyond just getting nicotine or just hanging out with another rat. But there's nothing in any of these journals about how social interaction impacts human smokers. Well, what the heck? Well, that means I gotta do my own study.
At this point, I have enough research and knowledge to make an informed guess on what I think will happen, which is called a hypothesis. This is what is behind step number 3. Like I said, it's an informed guess of what I think the relationship is between smoking enjoyment and the social interaction that smokers get while smoking in areas. But it also needs to be tested. I can't just go, well, based on what rats do, it's got to be the same for humans in smoking areas. Problem solved. Now I gotta move on to what's behind step number 4, which is designing and conducting a study to either confirm or disconfirm the hypothesis. So I send a survey out to students on campus asking smokers if they usually interact with others while smoking on campus, how much they enjoy the experience of smoking on campus, how often they visit the areas, and how much they look forward to smoking on campus. Vamonos! Now, using this data that I've collected, I now move on to look behind step number 5, and that's analyzing data. There's a lot that goes into making sure that we're asking the right questions and collecting good data, but now we gotta know what to do with those data. This is where statistics comes in. Statistics, in particular inferential statistics, it's fancy math that allows us to draw conclusions or inferences from the data, like whether there's a difference between the measures that's not due to chance, and how much of a difference. In my study, it was found that smokers who interacted with others while in smoking areas, they visited the areas more often and they enjoyed the experience of smoking on campus more than those who didn't interact with others while smoking. After that, behind step number 6 is where I make conclusions based on what I found. Like, it seems that while smoking areas were created to make smoking more inconvenient, it may actually have had an unintended consequence of making smoking more enjoyable for smokers because of the social interaction they experience while using them. But while making my conclusion, as a scientist, I also point out the limitations in the study, like the fact that the study wasn't an experiment, which is when you manipulate and control the situation to be able to make conclusions about cause and effect. Also, the study only included students on a college campus. Maybe it's different for other populations or demographics or even location. Oh, pish posh. This brings me to what I consider the most important part of the scientific method and science in general, behind step number 7. Based on what we've learned from this study and the limitations that I just described, how can we find out more? What new questions emerged? Is it replicable, or in other words, was this a one-time fluke, or would the same results happen again if I did the study again? So we start the process over again. This led me to do other experiments and studies, some that supported my hypotheses and some that didn't, and some that had unexpected results, which is super cool. When we get what's behind all the steps in the scientific method, we win! What is happening? We had fun today, didn't we? Oh, I'm so annoying. As you can see, science is all about discovery. Not looking to just confirm what you think should happen, but being open-minded to being wrong about your guesses and learning more in the process. An important part of being scientifically minded is to understand and be okay with the idea that science is always a work in progress, and that scientific knowledge is open to improvement and will never really be considered certain. This is why scientists don't use the words prove or proven when talking about research in science. Their work doesn't prove that something is true. It only provides evidence for or against something. For example, we don't expect to find proof to things like evolution or Big Bang or social comparison, but we can find evidence for it, which allows us to then develop theories, which are explanations for aspects of the world, and these explanations have been tested and retested through the rigorous process of the scientific method. In other words, scientific theories are the most reliable and comprehensive form of scientific knowledge. Just like people misunderstand the difference between using the word research when describing science versus just Googling opinion websites or memes, people often misuse the word theory to imply a speculation or an untested guess. That's why people who are uneducated on what science is will say shit like, evolution is just a theory, implying that it's untested or not credible, which is the exact opposite. Theories are based on a shit ton of complex research. I mean, gravity is also just a theory, but you don't really see people fighting about that. Now, that goal of discovery and open-mindedness is what I've always loved about science and research. It's always trying to know more and be better and correct its errors. It doesn't claim to be perfect or always right. It's open to improvement, and it just wants to give the best answers so that it can understand things. And that last part is something that a lot of people don't understand about it. They get mad when they're told that science says one thing, and then later they're told that science says something different. And then they're like, well, then why should we trust it? But what they don't realize is this is exactly why we should trust it. It's continually seeking to find the best, unbiased, representative answers, and it's a hell of a lot more trustworthy than our common sense, which obviously has been very, very wrong many times. If we only relied on common sense or intuition, we would still believe shit like drilling holes into the skull will let out evil spirits, or that tapeworms are a safe way to lose weight, and that smoking is an effective way of treating asthma, or that women's mental issues are because they're jealous of penises, or that bland breakfast cereals will keep people from masturbating. Bitch, I need some cornflakes. Those examples seem crazy now, right? But those beliefs were derived from intuition back in the day. Unfortunately, there are other examples of beliefs that have been debunked by science, yet people actually still believe. Like spanking is a good way to discipline children, or torture is a good way of getting bad guys to confess, or that men are naturally better leaders than women, or that vaccines cause autism. Now, these beliefs are often based on common sense or observation. For example, a parent thinks that spanking gets a kid to stop being bad because the kid then fears the pain of being spanked again, so they'll stop doing bad things. Or a police officer notices that threatening suspects leads to more confessions than not threatening them. Or maybe an employee sees more men as leaders than women, so they just assume that men must be better at it. Or a doctor notices that of all his autistic patients, all of them have been vaccinated, so it must be vaccines. However, our own abilities to observe and remember and analyze our world are limited, and so relying on them to be able to form accurate beliefs is a flawed way of thinking. Besides, we don't have the ability to immediately in our heads know and count all the kids that have autism and how many have had vaccines versus those who haven't, and then average the numbers for both of those groups and then compare them to find out that there's no difference between the two groups. And we can't predict the future to know that spanking actually teaches children that physical violence helps you to get what you want from someone, and that it can actually be emotionally harmful to the child by introducing fear and pain into the parent-child relationship. And we can't read minds to know that innocent people being threatened and tortured by police are actually more likely to falsely confess to a crime they didn't commit out of desperation or exhaustion or confusion. And we might not have the insight or the time or even the motivation to think harder about why more men are leaders than women in our company, when really it may just be because of systematic inequalities that have existed for years and years and years. That's why we have science. It will give you those answers. So because of our limitations, we may believe incorrect things, either because of what we observe or because of what someone else told us, and then we don't spend time or really even care to investigate it or question it. Unfortunately, this is more common than not. We're naturally inclined to spend most of our time not having the time or the motivation to think critically about everything that we see and that we do. That would be exhausting and very time consuming. But that's what makes us prone to bias, such as the confirmation bias. This is the tendency to seek, select, and remember information that confirms our beliefs, and to avoid and ignore and discredit information that disconfirms it. I'm sure you've heard people use the word research to mean looking up articles and stories online that only support their views, even if those sources are not at all scientifically based. And this is why some people will say that they don't trust scientists, and that's because the science doesn't support their view, or it provides evidence that directly contradicts their views, because confirmation bias is driving them to think that way. I'm a scientist. Confirmation bias is also why some people will handpick the evidence that supports their views or agendas by spouting off statistics that actually misrepresent the data, or by using unscientific sources. This is why it's important to be a critical thinker. And being a critical thinker, or having the ability and willingness to think clearly and rationally and independently, is key to being a researcher or just being someone who's scientifically minded. It's all about being objective and not allowing personal emotions or biases to influence your thinking, and being educated on how to recognize actual scientific research versus bullshit is also very helpful. Here are a couple of things to look for in sources or evidence or research that you're presented with. First, be careful of how news portrays science. They often give a abridged or sometimes uninformed summary, because journalists aren't scientists. And it's often sensationalized or overly simplified based on what would attract readers. So make sure that you read the whole news article and not just the headline. In the article, they should give a link or a citation, or at least the authors of the actual study, and then you should go and read the actual study to find out the details of how that study was conducted. This gives you more information to think about the study and the evidence a lot more critically. Now, if the study doesn't provide that level of detail, or if there isn't an actual study, then that's a pretty big red flag. Kind of like when my ex, Brock, had a futon for a bed and a bed for a couch. Another way you can know if you can trust a study is if it was published in a reputable peer-reviewed journal. There are tools that exist online that can help you to determine this, but some of the key factors that can help are: has the journal been around for a long time? Does it have an extensive peer review process, which is when other experts or scientists will actually review the scientist's work before publishing it? Is the journal used often by other scientists? This is actually determined by an impact factor, which is a number given to journals to say how often they're used or cited by other scientists. So journals are kind of like high school cliques if they had a ranking to determine how hard it was to get into them based on their standards and popularity. Like, there's the really popular and exclusive ones that only the best of the best can get into, like science, because of course the best journal would have the most obvious name, which has an impact factor of like 42. So it's kind of like the rich kids who were captains of all the sports. And then there's the ones that are easier to get into, but mostly if you have like a very specific interest, like the International Journal of Aviation Psychology, which has an impact factor of like 0.16. So it's kind of like the high school Lego club for tiny plastic brick architects, or for students that just need something on their college application. Now, even studies in the most prestigious of journals can have limitations. So, I mean, it helps to be educated on things like the inherent limitations of the different kinds of studies, like correlational studies and experiments and field studies and case studies, and population versus sample, and what confounds and extraneous variables are, or random assignment, or placebos, or confederates, or double-blind procedures, or reliability and validity, not to mention all of the statistical methods and analyses. But you don't have to be a scientist or know all of that stuff to be scientifically minded. You just need to be open-minded, actively aware of your biases when interpreting information, and being a critical thinker, and understanding the scientific method and the purpose of science, that it seeks to find the objective truth rather than just like, telling you what you want to hear, and that, it will admit when it's wrong, and it wants to correct its mistakes, and it's always trying to grow and be the best version of itself, continually learning. Maybe I should date science. For more videos, check out whatswithpeople.com, and also find us on YouTube and Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and all of those places. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you so much for watching.
I'm looking into the future, and I'm seeing you subscribing to my channel.
I fucked it up. This is not a good accent. We're going to try again. my name out of her mouth.